You are listening to the You Glow Girl podcast. This is a podcast for the above average girl who is working towards becoming her best self every day. On this podcast, we will talk all things self-development, spirituality, feminism, wellness, business, sex, relationships, and all the things we are constantly improving. I'm your host, Valerie Rocio. A type A overachieving vegan half Mexican Aries. I own a content creation agency that supports woman-owned businesses. I travel the world with my adorable English husband and spoil my 2 Chiweenie puppies. I believe we can be our best selves, live our best lives, and have it all. So join me while we listen to amazing guests who are doing the damn thing and as we all grow together. Hey Jordan, thanks for joining me on the You Glow Girl podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. I am looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yes, I'm excited to chat about all things sex, one of our favorite topics here at the You Glow Girl. We've gotten so much great feedback from our previous episodes with our mutual friend Rachel and other experts in the field, so it's become a very popular topic, and I'm really glad that people are open to hearing more about it and joining us in the sex positivity mission. Before we get started, though, could you share a bit about what you do and how you educate people on all things sex?
Yes. So I am Jordan Jones. I am a physician assistant by trade, and I primarily work in family practice. However, my heart is in women's health. I started the podcast Vaginas, Vulvas, and Vibrators solely to help women understand their bodies and bring more awareness to women's health, things that are affecting women, and to kind of just go into more detail about that.
Amazing. And so everybody will have to listen to your podcast as well, because I know it's really good. Well, I'm excited to chat with you today. Since this episode will be releasing right before Valentine's Day, we wanted to dive into a bit about the female anatomy, but also share a little bit about pleasure, one of our favorite topics. If anybody listened to our previous episode with Rachel, we talked a lot about masturbation and how it's actually really empowering and how, in general, the school system and most of our parents failed us. So let's dive into female anatomy. I know you do a lot of coaching and you also have your podcast. What have you found to be some of the biggest gaps in, our education around our own anatomy?
So I find that a lot of women don't know the proper terminology of their anatomy. I find that a lot in practice with my patients, but then also kind of talking with other women. We're not taught that in school. So I started my podcast out with what is female anatomy and how to identify my parts.
Amazing. And I'll admit, I'm definitely one of those people because I was telling you off the record, and I also mentioned in Rachel's interview, but I went to Catholic school and we had no form of sex education. And even in biology, we didn't really cover anything that could be even somewhat segued into sex health or anything like that. And I remember, and I share this all the time and everyone's like, what the hell? But I remember going to public school for 8th grade and my friend saying that we were going to a pool party and she was like, oh, I need to shave my vagina. And I was like, you're what? And I had no idea what she was talking about. And she was like, my vagina. And I was like, what are you referring to? And she had to literally point, and I was like, oh, your private parts. And that's the only name that I was given. And I also remember the exact same scenario when I was in Taekwondo. You had to aim for the groin in a self-defense class, and I didn't know what that was, and they were the groin area, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure what that is. And they were the crotch. And I was like, I'm still not understanding. And they had to literally put a little box around because I was like, I don't know what we're talking about here. And it's so crazy that I was maybe 12 or 13. And I feel like that is definitely an age where I should know these things.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to talk about it and then make sure that we're talking about it to people who have daughters as well, so that they can be sharing that information, so that hopefully the next generations have proper terminology. And one of the big things that it's important for is if something was to happen, you want your child to be able to say, they touched not my cuckoo, not my vajayjay. You want them to say, oh, they touched me on my vagina. They touched me on my vulva. If they go and report to a teacher, something happened to my cuckoo or whatever your family code name is, most people aren't going to know what that means. And then it's brushed off. So it's important to educate your children and know the anatomy for yourself as well. And it's important for pleasure because you need to know what to stimulate and what to touch.
And I think that's important to note that it like does start with a really young age, because at a young age, you know, whether they're 5 or 6, it doesn't have to be, I mean, it shouldn't be sexual. It's literally your anatomy. And so that's empowering a child to, you know, own their own body, understand their own body for one. But then as you get older, it also helps you communicate more clearly about your body, you know, whether you're a teenager or even an adult. And I think that's something that most of us struggle with is, you know, communicating our needs, wants, or anything around our body, because it's like, how do I even explain this? And I was just watching, we watched Bridgerton. Did you watch that?
Yes, I have been.
Oh, it's so good. And he even says something like pleasuring herself. And like, I feel like that's not even like an olden times situation. I think that's a very modern day thing where like I have friends who are, you know, we're in our 20s and we've talked about how we didn't know masturbation was like a very casual, normal thing for us to do as women. Like it's always joked about and talked about so lightly, like among guys and teenage boys. And, you know, you catch teenagers doing it with like magazines or whatever, but it's never talked about for females. And so it makes it seem very like shameful and dirty. And so, and then because it's never talked about, you feel like it's secretive or that you shouldn't even be doing it. And so it's interesting that we can even get to this age and still be like very hush hush about all of it.
Right. And there's women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and older who have never had an orgasm. That all kind of comes back to this self-pleasure anatomy and all of that.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about, you know, the anatomy and what some of like the biggest misconceptions are, and, you know, dive into even, you know, orgasms and why is a lot of us went most of our lives not getting them.
Yes. So to start out with anatomy, the easiest way to explain it, since most of you are listening to this, is going to be make a peace sign, flip it upside down, and stick your thumb through it. So the biggest confusion is that the vulva and the vagina are the same thing. That is not true. The vulva is the external anatomy. So here you have like your mons pubis, the top of your, what kind of terminology do you want to use? The fatty pad at the top. Then you have your labia. You have your labia minora, your labia majora, your clitoris right below, which is your thumb. And then you have your urethra and vagina. The vagina is where childbirth happens, where penetration occurs. And all you see externally is the entrance, but internally is what is the vaginal canal. And that's kind of the biggest thing that I've seen is that most people say, my vagina hurts when they're talking about their vulva, when they're talking about their clitoris, their urethra, and they haven't learned or are unsure the difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, even like I just said, like my friend said she was going to shave her vagina and she wasn't actually, I guess. It's just what we say.
Exactly.
I would like to know as well, because my friend and I were just talking about this the other day, how no one talks, because we don't see, and like guys openly change in the locker room and girls are very, you know, private about things, especially in your teenage years. Nobody talks about like your labia or your lips. And my friend was saying how most of us grow up thinking that we're real messed up or that we have something really weird going on, when it's actually very normal to have different types of labias. And I feel like that's something that's just never, you know, made clear to us. So then we get even more insecure about it. And then it creates a whole insecurity that doesn't need to be added to the lack of communication and sexual interactions.
Yes. So labias come in many different shapes, sizes, colors. You have your labia minora and your labia majora. For some women, their inner labia, the labia minora, are going to be larger than their majora. For others, it's going to be the opposite. And everybody's unique. Your right side may be bigger than your left side, vice versa. They're all different, every single one of them. And it's definitely important to normalize the fact that our labia are different. It's funny, Rachel and I have a mutual friend. Her name is Dana, and Dana always asks about what everybody else's labia looks like, in just trying to normalize it and help us all understand that we're all different. And that's funny because that's just who I think of. And that I've had these conversations with friends about how some of us have larger inner labia, larger outer labia. We're all different.
And it's so funny because that was one thing that I, again, never learned about. Like, my mother definitely didn't talk to me about my labias. And I had to like really like calm myself down when I was a teenager and basically think like, okay, if I'm going to like my women's wellness checkups and the doctor hasn't said anything, I'm like, okay, I must be normal. Because I'm like, if it was something abnormal, the doctor would probably say something.
Yeah. And as a provider, when I do pelvic exams, women's exams, I'm not judging, I'm not paying attention to your anatomical differences. However, I could see where, like, as a provider, I'm not saying anything about it, but for some women, their inner labia or their outer labia may be longer, and that actually can cause pain. And that maybe not be something that I bring up as a provider, but as a patient, if you're not telling me that they're causing you pain during intercourse or at other times, I'm not going to be able to help you with solutions or options for that as well.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us back to, in general, just understanding how our bodies work, because you may have that pain and then not realize that that's not how you're supposed to feel, and then never address it. And I feel like I'm sure that most women can relate to having, one of their first couple sex experiences probably was just like, oh, sex is just not that great. Or thinking like, oh, this is totally normal that it's painful, or whatever it may be, because we don't learn to communicate those things. And then pairing that with our lack of understanding of our own pleasure, it's like we just kind of accept it as it is and probably trust most men if that's who your encounter is.
When it comes to first experiences, I think that a lot of women don't really know to expect pleasure and expect orgasm or, some sort of heightened pleasure. So you just go in and you kind of just do whatever the man does because you're just following their lead, and you never even correlate that. I mean, my first orgasm with a partner wasn't until I was 23. I had been having sex for years and never even experienced that with somebody. And we're not talking about that either. And helping young women in particular understand that they should also be receiving pleasure from an encounter.
And there's also like the other side of it as well, that if it's also the guy's one of his first experiences, that if he also received the same minimal sex education, then most of his sex education probably came from porn or, non-educational platforms that show sex but aren't necessarily educational. Porn isn't meant to be educational. It's meant to be entertainment. So you shouldn't take it literally. But let's dive into like orgasms, because I don't think that's a topic that most of us talk about much. And I think most women can relate to not experiencing one until their 20s, if that, and definitely not, with their first partner. I'm sure most women can relate to that as well.
When it comes to orgasms, about 80% of women need clitoral stimulation to achieve orgasm, which is really important to understand because most women need the clitoral stimulation. And when it comes to anatomy, knowing where your clitoris is kind of like the first part of that. There's a lot of different ways to achieve orgasm. So you have clitorally, you have vaginally, you have G-spot, you have anal or anally, and then I've also recently learned about a cervical orgasm. So there's lots of different ways that you may find pleasure. And experimenting with all of the different ways is going to be the best way to figure out what you like the most. And when it comes to self-pleasure, one of the really important things I think is to try new things. And you may find that you really are stimulated on the left side of your clitoris more than the right. And when you do masturbate, a lot of times you're going for the same thing every single time because it'll get the job done. But trying those other locations, trying different types of stimulation can be really helpful for you to better understand what leads you to orgasm, what feels good. And when you're able to know that about yourself, it's easier to explain to a partner as well.
I think that's one thing that, again, teaching not necessarily your children, but, your teenage and close, when your kids are close to an age where they're potentially sexually active, to masturbate and, enjoy pleasure on their own, it will really help to them to understand what does feel good for them. And I think for women that could be this is obviously my personal opinion, is that if that's something I had known when I was younger and understood what felt good, it can also help you not only communicate that with a partner, but also know that everything is going okay, because I think we do get left in that gray area in those first couple of years of being sexually active, where we just don't know that it could be any other way because we haven't tried it.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. What are your thoughts on vibrators for teenagers?
So I think, and this is coming from me, where I had, like I said, zero sex education. It was not openly, it is still not openly talked about with my parents. I don't have any sisters. I have a brother who's 7 years older than me. So I think it would have been very helpful as a teenager, because I went into relationships with the abstinence approach. And I think that was not dangerous, but I do think that, my parents taking the abstinence approach with me did leave me very, very uneducated and very lost, and left me putting the trust in whoever I was with. And I don't think that's safe when, nobody, teenage boys don't know what the hell they're doing. They're just, trying to get laid. And I think that if you can provide, your teenage daughter, when she seems to be at an age where that's something that's going to be going on, a vibrator, then I think that's great, because it's even better understanding of how she feels. And I think in general, it may be not deter her necessarily, but maybe slow down the drive to want to have sex with a boy if, that craving, I guess, is satisfied elsewhere.
Absolutely. My mom and I, we actually have a very open relationship, and we talk about a lot of this stuff. And when I was 15, she had recommended that I get a vibrator. She was going to take me to get one, but little did she know I had already gotten one a few months prior. So I definitely am team vibrators for teenagers.
Yeah, that's wild to me. I can't imagine. My mom found out I was on birth control at 15, and it was the end of the world, the absolute end of the world. And that was me trying to be, safe, because I didn't know about anything that I needed to know at the time, which is so crazy.
Right. Well, and if you're not taught a lot about condoms and, safe sex practices or safer sex practices and all of that stuff, that leaves a really wide gap and definitely puts you at risk.
Definitely. And I think my parents, and I'm sure most parents who take this approach, feel that, because my parents took the abstinence approach because we were Catholic. And I think that they thought the less we talk about it, the less we educate her on it, the less she'll know, so the less she'll do. And I don't know if this is in every case, but for me, that backfired, because it was more like I went into it blindly.
Absolutely. And I think that even though you're not talking about it, doesn't mean that you're not going to be curious. And I think that almost makes you more curious. Well, we're not talking about it. So what is it? Why are we not talking about it? And definitely sparks your interest a little bit more.
I do think it's interesting, because I'm did they just think I was just never going to do it? I'm still I don't want to call them out, but I'm still very curious what was their game plan with me. But I guess it was also very hard. I mean, they were doing the best they could. They had a teenage boy. And so I'm sure it was very odd having a girl that was, initially in Catholic school and then sent her into the hells of public school.
And I'm sure that they probably just did what happened for them, and they didn't know any different. And I think that's a lot of times the case. And parents that are wanting, taking that next step to learn more to help educate their kids, that's kind of where we're going. But at the time, if you don't know, you don't know.
And I feel like this is completely unrelated to sex necessarily, but now that I'm 26 and I'm married and we are technically by law considered adults, I'm realizing more and more that what we thought were adults when we were kids are actually people like me and my husband now. And I'm wow, we have no idea what we're doing. So most of my childhood, my parents probably had no idea what they were doing. So I try to give them some grace, because I'm oh, adults aren't really as put together as we thought they were.
Absolutely. We are all just trying to navigate the world.
But yeah, let's dive into because Valentine's Day is around the corner. Let's dive into, self-pleasure, and then also communication with your partner, because because I think that's something that, we all want to have, like, be sexy, and feel good, obviously, during sex. But I think a lot of us, self-sabotage because we're either not willing to talk about what we want or we don't know how to communicate it. So what are some of your tips there for, maybe somebody in a relationship that's trying to get, creative in bed?
Yes. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about, in particular, confidence in the bedroom. And I think that when you're not feeling sexy, a lot of times you're not going to be interested in sex. And so one of the key things to do is take care of yourself first and spend that time nurturing yourself, learning yourself, caring for yourself, whatever that looks like. All of us have our own self-care rituals that are unique. So for some people, that would just be relaxing by reading a book or taking a bubble bath or using candles. One thing I would always recommend is look at using like a soy candle. Soy candles actually melt at a lower temperature, so you can pour them and use that as like a massage oil. And you can use that for massage. Your partner can give you massages, vice versa. And then create like a playlist to help you relax, help you kind of get into the mood for being intimate with your partner. And then think about how you talk about yourself or talk to yourself. Your mindset is very important. They always say, like, what you say is who you become or who you are, or what you say to yourself is who you become. Think about, like, am I talking to myself positively? If you're not, work on redirecting those thoughts, work on changing that. And that's going to help you feel more confident. And then that'll translate to confidence in the bedroom as well. One thing that I love, love, love to recommend is lingerie. Lingerie is fabulous for helping you feel more confident. And I think that's because you can use it to hide areas of your body that you're more self-conscious about and enhance areas that you want to show off. And the whole goal of lingerie is to feel good in it. So you want to get something that makes you feel like $1,000,000. Lingerie is like my favorite thing. I think every woman should have it. I always tell ladies, wear lingerie 30 days in a row and see how you feel after that. And I think a lot of people feel very different after their 30 days of lingerie. So if you're looking for something to do, give that a try.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. As far as communication goes, I think the biggest thing is learning what you like in order to communicate it with your partner. Something that I encourage you to do is make a want, will, won't list. So these are things I want to try. These are things I'm willing to try. And these are things I don't want in my intimacy sex life. That can help you get more clear on what your interests are and have your partner do that as well so that they become more clear on what their interests are. And then you can use that as a talking point to help with communication. Somebody had suggested to me, like, write all this stuff down and put it in a jar and draw something out and use that as like your dinner conversation and be like, hey, so it says, do you want to have anal sex? Are you interested in anal sex? Yes or no? Are you interested in toes, sucking on toes? Are you interested in high heels? I mean, things like that help you learn what your partner's interests are and what they may not be interested in. And then when you have that, you are able to kind of confidently in the bedroom, you know that your partner likes when you wear heels. So if you add that in the bedroom, you know that that's something that they're interested in. And that's going to help you be more confident instead of being kind of worried that it will be maybe rejected because you already know that that's their like. Another really awesome thing that I came across. So I love the 5 love languages. And something that I recently found is the erotic blueprint, which I kind of like to call the 5 love languages of intimacy. And that can be something really helpful to do with your partner or by yourself to help you learn about how you are in the bedroom. So the 5 different categories are energetic, sensual, sexual, kinky, and shapeshifter. So if you're sensual like myself, the sound is important. The texture is important. The smell is important. And all of those things matter in creating the right environment for me to be pleasured in. Now, somebody who's sensual, it's going to be more just getting right in, or sexual. they're going to be more into getting into the act of intercourse. And keeping that in mind about what your partner is versus what you are can help you guys communicate about why you like things different, but then help you understand each other as well.
I think a sex therapist, I can't remember her name, but I'm subscribed to her email list, and she has like a quiz that you can take to basically figure out what your archetype is. It's really helpful because I did it and then I had my husband do it, and then it turned out like we were both very much like wanting the same things but also disliking the same things, which is great because, you know, that's easy for us to, you know, get better at sex. But I think it's also important to consider if you're nervous about communicating what you want in the bedroom, is that your partner wants you to be turned on and wants you to be having a good time. So if you aren't loving something, or you know you would like something more, you can communicate that so that you can have a better experience, because that's going to really turn them on as well. Like, no one wants to be, you know, playing around with a dead fish. And so I think it's important, you know, I think just remove the insecurity from it and just think about like you're not necessarily criticizing, you're actually just amplifying the experience for both of you, because they're going to get even more turned on if you're more turned on. So it can, you know, just escalate from there.
Absolutely. And all of these tools are helpful for opening up that conversation. If you're having a hard time communicating, you know, you can, like I said, write it down, put it in a jar, something in particular that you don't like. And when you pull it out, you can be like, yeah, I really don't actually like that. I'm not interested in that. But you're able to use that as a tool to help open up that communication line with your partner.
Definitely. Assuming that people are, you know, deciding to get a little creative around Valentine's Day. I know a lot of people always, it sparks some interest. What do you recommend, or do you have any insight specifically on, you know, sex toys and how to incorporate that into an experience with your partner without, you know, going wildly out of someone's comfort zone? Because I know sex stores can be very intimidating.
Yes. So toys in the bedroom are a fabulous idea. And one of the easiest ways to kind of start incorporating toys in the bedroom is going to be like a massaging toy that vibrates. So one that I recommend, I also sell Pure Romance. That's one of my things in my repertoire that I do, but they have a heart massager. It's a heating heart for massage, but then it also vibrates. And that can be a great way to be like, oh, we're just doing massages, but it's got that vibration. And then your partner might decide like, hey, why don't I try this somewhere else? And that's a great way to introduce vibration into the bedroom. Now, if you're looking for a particular toy, I would recommend trying what looks enticing to you. But since most women need clitoral stimulation, start with a clitoral toy. You can start with something, you know, that fits on your finger. You can start with something that's a bullet. You can start with something that's you hold it in your hand. There's lots of different styles. And when it comes to vibrators, it kind of just is trial and error. You know, try some, see how you like it. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But just because you don't like one doesn't mean that you're not going to like any other.
That's where communication is key, because just because something is in the sex shop doesn't mean that you're going to like it, or just because you see something used in porn doesn't mean it's going to be how it looks in porn. I know that in most cases in porn, these people use these things very frequently, and so it can look almost like a breeze, but then it can be quite uncomfortable if it's your first time trying something. And I think sometimes that's when porn can be a little horrifying, because you're like, oh my God, I'm supposed to do that with that. And then it's like, oh no, you actually need a ton of trial and error before that actually, you know, just works like that for you.
Exactly. The other thing I do have for the listeners is, since it's Valentine's Day week, I have my top 10 foreplay tips, and they can find those at foreplay.vaginasvulvasandvibrators.com. I have a little video in there that they can go check out all of my top foreplay tips.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Can you give us a little teaser of maybe what the top 3 are?
Ooh, okay. So let's start with the top one, because that's the first one that comes to mind. Using a flavored lubricant for foreplay. So what I would highly recommend is like put this in. Okay, so don't tell your partner this. Make sure that they're not listening to this. Otherwise, it'll totally ruin it. So pause this if you're in the car with your partner and come back and listen to this. But put it in 4 spots on your body, but tell your partner you put it in 5, and that there's no sex until you find all 5. So that leaves you controlling the foreplay. And you can put that in different areas of your body that maybe you want to try more stimulation. So maybe you want to try the back of your neck. Maybe it's behind your knees. Maybe it's on your labia. Maybe it's on your inner thighs. Maybe it's your toes. There's a lot of different ways you can use that, but that's a great way to try and explore in the bedroom as well. The other tip that I love is ice cubes in the bedroom or temperature play. That can be really great to rub on your partner, have them rub on you, or for oral favors, having an ice cube in your mouth can be really fun too for you or your partner, vice versa.
That sounds fun. I haven't tried either of those personally. Starting this podcast has definitely helped me communicate better in general with my partner as well, my hubby. Do you have any final tips that we can close on for anybody that is wanting to spice up the bedroom for Valentine's Day or enjoy some self-pleasure if they're single?
I would say go get that vibrator, go get that thing that you're wanting and give it a try.
And if they want to buy from you through Pure Romance, how can they do so?
Yes. So my Instagram is Jordan Donnell, JordanDnelle. You can click on my link in the bio there and it'll pop up to lots of different options, but it's pureromance.com/Jordan Jones. And that's how you can get some vibrators. The top vibrator that I recommend, or my clients recommend, should I say, is the Opening Act. It's a top-selling clitoral vibrator, and that is a really fabulous one to start with as well.
Amazing. And if they want to check out your podcast, where can they find that as well?
Yes. So it's Vaginas, Vulvas, and Vibrators. You can find that on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, whatever you listen to podcasts on.
Thank you so much for joining me. I know this episode, we kind of touched a little bit on everything sex-wise, and I'm just excited to share more on this platform because I know a lot of people have been, craving this information and having a more casual conversation about it. So I really appreciate you joining me and sharing your insight.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. And for all of our subscribers, make sure to subscribe, share this podcast on Instagram, or if you like this episode, share with somebody who needs to hear it. And we'll be back with more episodes every Friday.